And Prime Minister Mark Carney's first international trip. It's a quick visit, but jam-packed to strengthen Canada's ties with two of its closest allies, France and the United Kingdom.
Right after taking office, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney bypassed Washington and chose Paris and London for his first diplomatic visit. Why is that? And how does this impact the economy and national security of your country? One of the main reasons for this decision is the intense tensions between Canada and the U.S. over tariff policies. The Trump administration previously imposed high tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, directly affecting Canada's industries. According to estimates, U.S. tariffs have reduced Canada's export value to the U.S. by over 10% in 2024. For a country like Canada, whose economy heavily depends on trade with the U.S., this is a shock. However, Carney and his government decided not to simply accept the status quo. Instead, they chose a different path, expanding relations with Europe and Asia. This not only helps reduce dependence on the U.S., but also creates new opportunities for the economy. The question is, could this be a strategic trade-off, considering that the trade war is far from over?
I want to ensure that France and the whole of Europe works enthusiastically with Canada, the most European of non-European countries, determined like you to maintain the most positive possible relations with the United States. Canada is a reliable, trustworthy, and strong partner of France.
This situation becomes even more complex when Prime Minister Carney raises concerns about the F-35 program, one of the most important defense cooperation projects between Canada and the U.S. Why is there controversy? Canadian officials have expressed concerns that the U.S. could use the kill switch software that can shut down F-35 fighter jets in emergencies, which would cause Canada to lose control over the fighter jets it has invested billions of dollars in. If the F-35 program is cancelled, it would create a shockwave in NATO relations. In fact, Canada's departure from this project could diminish U.S. military influence within the alliance, pushing allied nations to look for alternative options from Europe, such as France's or Germany's weapons systems. This is not just a defense issue, but also a powerful political leverage against America's allies. But instead of continuing to rely on Washington, Carney is rebuilding relations with Europe. In Paris, he met with President Emmanuel Macron and discussed not just economic cooperation, but also defense. During the meeting in Paris, Macron proposed a new collaboration between Canada and France on defense and technology projects worth $15 billion US, strengthening Canada's defense capabilities without depending on the U.S. In London, Prime Minister Carney also had discussions with UK leaders on financial partnerships and long-term strategies post-Brexit. This is a strong signal that Canada no longer sees the U.S. as its only partner.
Arctic sovereignty is a strategic priority of our government.
Another hotspot in relations between Canada and the U.S. is the issue of Arctic sovereignty. With climate change accelerating the ice melt in the region, the Arctic is becoming a new battleground for resources and power. By 2050, it is forecast that the Arctic could hold about 30% of the world's untapped oil and gas reserves, making it a flashpoint for disputes between nations. The Ottawa government is being extremely cautious about this issue and opposes any actions it deems as infringing on its national interests. This growing tension is only exacerbating a relationship already affected by Trump's protectionist policies and economic and defense divisions. With all these changes, Canada-US defense relations are at a major crossroads. Canceling the F-35 contract could be a clear signal of a fracture in the defense partnership between the two countries. If this happens, other NATO nations may look to European alternatives. This could completely reshape NATO's defense structure and weaken U.S. leadership within the alliance. When a former U.S. president has a meltdown at 2 a.m., posting like a heartbroken teenager just to threaten the world, you know something serious is wrong with America. 2 a.m., a president, or just an ex? In the middle of the night, while most of America was still asleep, Donald Trump's social media lit up like a teenage breakup. More than 10 posts in just 1 hour, and right in the middle of it, a bombshell. If the EU and Canada team up, I'll slap them with killer tariffs. Not a formal speech, not an official statement, just a midnight threat, typed out like someone just broke up with the country. This led many to ask, is this a strategic move or the sign of a man losing control? Is it a last-ditch attempt to distract the public? while the ground beneath him quietly begins to shift. And if that's true, then America's real problem may be bigger than tariffs. Less than 24 hours later, the backlash begins. It didn't take long. Within 24 hours of Trump's late-night posts, America's oldest allies began pushing back. Hard. Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, a man once seen as one of Trump's biggest fans, suddenly flipped. We'll make sure the U.S. feels the pain. I'm sorry for the American people, but this is on Trump. Then came France, then the UK, then the entire European Union, all backing a new trade alliance with Canada. Without the United States, they were once best friends forever. Now, it's block, unplug, and remove from trusted partners list. One EU trade advisor even joked, Trump used to host the party. Now, he's locked outside the living room. In global politics, there's no room for 2 a.m. tantrums. One tweet in the wrong tone, and you risk losing alliances that took decades to build. The American wallet is screaming, while Trump's busy picking fights with longtime allies. Everyday Americans are staring down a spending crisis. A survey from the University of Michigan shows consumer confidence has hit a 15-year low. Rent is rising. Wages can't keep up with inflation. And basic living costs are crushing family budgets. Some experts warn, those 2 a.m. tweets aren't just impulsive. They're a distraction tactic. When the economy's in chaos, picking a fight overseas becomes the easiest way to divert attention. A Bloomberg analyst put it best. Americans don't care who yells the loudest. They care who makes life a little easier. He says, make America great again. But all we see is make recession real fast. From America first to America alone, Trump once said, America first. But now, it's starting to look more like America alone. Major U.S. companies, Tesla, Apple, GM, they're quietly shifting production lines to Canada and the EU, all to avoid the risks of sudden U.S. policy swings. Within 48 hours of Trump's latest tariff threats, stock prices for major manufacturers plunged. Investors got the message. Political chaos is not a business model. You can't lead the world if the world no longer wants to follow, because no one wants to build their future in a market where tomorrow could be undone by a late-night emotional post. True leadership doesn't shout. It earns trust. Not everyone wants to stay at the party. In a world full of uncertainty, what countries and businesses need most is stability and trust. But if a nation keeps changing its message, threatening partners, and shaking confidence in the market, then no matter how grand the party may be, guests will start leaving. Allies need consistency. Investors need to calculate risk. And the American people? They need answers for tomorrow, not midnight promises made in the dark. If someone wakes up at 2 a.m. just to threaten the world, then we have to ask, are they really in control of the situation? Or is the situation controlling them? Canada reacts strongly and retaliates fiercely as Trump imposes a 25% tariff on cars. Flight bookings between the U.S. and Canada drop by 70% as citizens boycott travel to the U.S. Trump sparks trade war. When Donald Trump announced a 25% tariff on cars imported from all countries, including Canada, is he sparking a new trade war, or is this just a political move? This decision not only affects the automotive industry, but also creates significant tension between the two neighboring countries. So why is Canada reacting so strongly? Prime Minister Mark Carney didn't hesitate to call it a direct attack on Canadian workers. Is this the beginning of a bigger conflict? Will Canada back down under this pressure, or will they continue to stand firm? Canada reacts strongly, boycotting travel and trade. With Trump's decision, Canada didn't sit idly by. The latest data shows that flight bookings between the US and Canada have dropped by up to 70%. Why are Canadians choosing to boycott travel to the US? How are they reacting to this decision? The Buy Canadian Only movement is spreading fast. At supermarkets like Costco, Canadians are sharing images of only purchasing domestic products. This action not only shows their spirit of unity, but also sends a strong message. We will not be oppressed. Can a boycott movement truly impact the U.S. economy? Will we see a significant shift in trade relations between these two countries? Domestic travel booms, tours shift direction. One of the most notable reactions is the domestic travel boom in Canada. Cross-country tours are selling out, while trips to the US are being canceled in large numbers. But what is driving Canadians to turn back to their own country instead of traveling to the US? Canadians are choosing to explore their own country instead of going to the US. This is not just a protest against US policies, but also a declaration of the nation's sovereignty. Will this shift last long-term, or is it just a temporary change? Are Canadians realizing that they can find amazing experiences right within their own country? And could this become a driving force for growing tourism and a stronger domestic economy in the future? Protests in Canada. Strong unity. Unlike typical boycotts, Canadian citizens have shown strong unity through protests. Notably, in Toronto, a protest took place in front of the U.S. consulate with the slogan "Elbows Up," a symbol of resilience and solidarity. MP Charlie Angus spoke boldly. "We will never be the 51st state of the U.S. We will not kiss the ring of the dictator Trump." This statement shows the determination of Canadians to protect their nation's sovereignty. Can these protests create enough pressure to change U.S. policies? Can this unity become a key factor for Canada to exert greater influence in international relations? Message from the government and citizens. Prime Minister Mark Carney has strongly affirmed that Canada will protect its workers, protect its businesses, and protect the homeland. The government and Canadian citizens are demonstrating an impressive unity in defending the country's national interests. In addition to the boycotts and domestic protests, this movement has gained attention worldwide. Countries like Australia, France, Scotland, and many others have expressed their support for Canada. This shows that Canada is not just protecting its own interests, but also setting an example for other nations. Will this movement inspire other countries to rise up and defend their national rights? Will we see a global wave of resistance? Will Canada truly change the global trade landscape? Or will this just be a small fight that won't lead to any major change? What will happen to the Canadian people in this trade war? Foreign Minister Melanie Joly has just delivered a fiery response to Trump's 25% tariff on key Canadian exports. In a direct warning to Washington, she made it clear, Canada will not back down, but this battle is no longer just about tariffs. The fight has expanded into security, military cooperation, and strategic control over resources. The question now is, will Canada break free from U.S. dependence, or will Trump's pressure force a retreat? As the U.S.'s biggest trading partner, Canada imports more American goods than any other country. In 2023 alone, trade between the two nations soared past $800 billion. Yet, despite this deep economic relationship, Trump has imposed a crippling 25% tariff on aluminum, steel, auto parts, and lumber. The immediate impact: construction costs in the U.S. skyrocket, shaking the housing market. Auto prices jump. American manufacturers now face higher costs on essential Canadian parts. Everyday consumers feel the heat, with higher prices on food, gas, and basic goods. Economists sound the alarm. This trade war could cost hundreds of thousands of jobs on both sides of the border. Melanie Joly did not hold back. Canada has stood by the U.S. as a loyal ally for decades. Taxing our economy is like punishing your own people. Experts warn that Trump's tariffs are only the tip of the iceberg. This isn't just about trade, it's about power. The U.S. wants more than just money. They want control. Defense spending. The U.S. is demanding Canada pay more for NATO resource grab. Washington wants greater access to Canadian oil, gas, and minerals. Water supply. Trump's team is eyeing Canada's vast freshwater reserves, including the Great Lakes. But Canada is standing firm. Melanie Joly sent a clear message. We will not allow strategic threats to be used as leverage against our economy. The Trump administration has accused Canada of fueling America's fentanyl crisis, but the facts tell a different story. What the numbers reveal. Less than 1% of fentanyl in the U.S. comes from Canada. China and Mexico are the primary sources of fentanyl smuggled into the U.S. Canada has spent $1.3 billion tightening border security and working with U.S. drug enforcement agencies. Despite these efforts, Trump continues to blame Canada. Many believe this is just a negotiation tactic to force trade concessions. In a stunning development, the Trump administration has threatened to kick Canada out of Five Eyes, the powerful intelligence-sharing alliance between the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. What happens if Canada is removed? Canada loses access to critical global intelligence. Defense. Partnerships with allies weaken. The US could isolate Canada in cybersecurity and military tech, but Canada is already preparing for this possibility. The government is strengthening intelligence partnerships with Europe, Japan, and South Korea. Melanie Joly made it clear, we stand with Ukraine, and we warn that a weak deal on Ukraine will set a dangerous precedent for China on Taiwan. With Trump's trade war escalating, Canada is taking bold steps to become more independent from the US economy. Key actions. Canada is taking new trade deals with Asia and Europe, expanding ties with the UK, the EU, Japan, South Korea, and Mexico to reduce dependence on the US. Strengthening NATO military cooperation. Building defense ties beyond Washington's influence. Investing in cybersecurity and military tech. Ensuring Canada is secure against new threats. Developing domestic natural resources. Keeping Canadian oil, gas, and minerals under Canadian control. Joly sent a final warning. Canada is strong, resource-rich, and independent. We will defend our economy, our sovereignty, and our future. Can you imagine a neighboring country standing up to Trump and really striking back? This isn't a fictional story. Recently, Canada made a bold move that blindsided President Trump in the escalating trade war between the two nations. When Trump announced a 25% tariff on Canadian goods on February 1st, he was confident no country would dare respond. However, contrary to his expectations, Canada not only opposed the move, but retaliated with a powerful strategy. This firm response took the US by surprise. Instead of accepting it, Canada stood its ground, determined to protect its economy and sovereignty. In fact, in 2024, Canada exported goods worth $12.7 billion to the US, while the US exported more than $349 billion to Canada, making this trade relationship extremely important and intensifying the stakes of this conflict. This is a clear sign that long-standing trade relations can be severely threatened by unilateral tariff policies. What's notable is that Canada's response didn't just come from the government, but had strong support from the entire society. Politicians and citizens alike rallied together, calling for unity to resist what they saw as US impositions. The Canadian government announced it would impose a 25% tariff on approximately $30 billion worth of US goods, a move that's unprecedented in the history of US-Canada relations. This decision reflects not only frustration with US policies, but also sends a strong message about Canada's autonomy and its ability to stand firm in a complex global trade environment. But it's not just Canada. Mexico, also caught in this tariff conflict, declared it would retaliate on March 8th if Trump didn't reverse his tariffs. At the same time, China announced tariffs on US agricultural products, including wheat, corn, chicken, cotton, and even fruits, vegetables, and dairy, totaling around 15% tariffs on US goods. This has made the situation even more tense. And Trump certainly couldn't have predicted such strong resistance from all these trade partners. Immediately after the tariffs were imposed, the US stock market reacted negatively. In just 2 days, the Dow Jones dropped 1.5%, the Nasdaq fell 0.35%, and even Best Buy, a major retail brand, saw its stock price plummet by 13%. This was a major shock for investors, clearly demonstrating the direct impact these decisions have on the US economy and key industries. This decline also reflects market concerns over the long-term consequences of these tariff policies. With the new tariffs in place, inflation is rapidly rising. Consumer goods, especially essential imports from Canada, Mexico, and China, will see significant price increases, pushing up the cost of living for American citizens. This will make it harder for consumers to maintain their standard of living as prices climb and wages fail to keep pace. This situation could drag on, creating an unwanted inflation cycle, seriously affecting purchasing power and the quality of life. The trade war doesn't just affect consumers, but also pushes the U.S. economy toward the risk of recession. U.S. businesses will face higher production costs, forcing them to cut spending and investment. This could lead to slower growth and even an increase in unemployment. Companies will struggle to maintain operations effectively in an environment of rising costs and decreasing consumer spending. Major industries like manufacturing, retail, and agriculture could suffer significant losses, deeply impacting the U.S. economy in the long run.